Going on YouTube? Welcome to another episode on my YouTube channel. I'm Kevin Jenkins, and I hope you all are out there staying safe and making sure that your families are all healthy in the midst of the times that we're in. And today I want to discuss about building your legacy. And I think about when you talk about legacy, you think about estate planning. You think about how you want your assets to be passed down. So that's what this episode will detail. I think that sometimes in life, we all want to reach our highest dreams and we want to live life to the fullest. But we also must keep in mind what we want to leave behind, what we want our legacy to be for our kids and our kids' kids. And I think sometimes in life, we get so wrapped around prioritizing our own goals that we forget why we were placed here on this earth. And it's one, to live God's word, and for two, to be able to give to others. And when you're giving to others, you're being selfless instead of selfish. And it allows you to be able to leave an inheritance. And that's what this conversation and this episode is going to be about. I'm talking about how you can develop an estate plan and what exactly is detailed when you discuss and talk about an estate plan. Now, an estate plan is pretty much you coming up with a strategy on how you plan to leave your assets after you pass away. So you want to be able to maximize what you're going to leave behind for your beneficiaries. And you can have a will in place, you can have a trust in place, and I'm going to describe the differences of the two so you can have an idea of what's the best for your specific situation. But before I go further, I want to stress the importance of making sure that you work with an attorney or a tax advisor when you're developing your estate plan, just for the simple fact that when your assets are being transferred or distributed, it may go through what's called a probate. So there may be court fees associated with that. You also have federal taxes that you possibly will have to pay, on a will or a trust. And you want to make sure that you're having informed planning, from an attorney or a tax advisor. They're giving you information on the tax associated issues so you can make sure that you're able to maximize what you're going to leave behind. And it allows you to avoid, just the hassle of not having certain things in place and making sure that you can minimize your taxes and being able to have significant savings from thorough and well-informed planning. So I definitely would recommend make sure that you're working with an attorney or a tax advisor. They're really going to put you in a position with making sure that your estate plan is in the right direction. So another way to maximize what you leave behind for your beneficiaries is thinking how your assets will be passed down to them in just your estate as a whole. You want to make sure that little as possible of your estate and your will or your trust, you want as little as possible to go to court fees, to taxes and other expenses. You want that to be very small, the amount that you have to pay out, so you can maximize what you have. And you also have, when it comes to leaving gifts and estates behind, federal taxes on these transactions tend to be a lot higher. They're more expensive. And with estate and gift taxes, you have what's called exemption limits, where you're able to give up to a specific amount without incurring taxes. And one strategy that people will use is the gift tax exemption, which allows them to be able to transfer assets while they're living. So it allows them to be able to maximize the assets that they're leaving behind for the beneficiaries. Now, I want to discuss what a will is. A will is very big. It's one way on how you can structure your estate plan. And what a will is, it's a legal document specifying how you would like to transfer your assets or how they'll be distributed to your beneficiaries after death. And you also can appoint a guardian for minor children as well. Now, a will is so important because it allows you to be precise and clear on how you want your assets to be passed down. It gives you the peace of mind and it gives you the accountability, knowing that your assets are going to be passed down according to your instructions and that no one else is going to interfere with that. Now, the ramifications of not having a will are substantial. If you don't have a will, the state that you reside in, they are going to decide specifically how your assets are distributed to your beneficiaries according to its laws. And that's known as a dying intestate. And what a dying intestate is, the resulting settlement, it may not be specifically to what you would like for your survivors. So rather than leaving it in the state hands and putting it in the dying interstate, make sure that you take the time to develop a will, because it's going to be according to your instructions. Now, I look at having a will just as important as having an LLC if you're a business owner. Typically, if you have an LLC, it's a limited liability company, and it prevents the owners from having a responsibility or being liable for the company's debts or liabilities. So with an LLC, you have the infrastructure in place or the protection that covers you if something were to go wrong. And I think that, when it comes to having a will, you have the infrastructure in place to be able to transfer your assets based on your specific instructions. So it's vitally important, as it is for a business owner, to have an LLC. And also, you want to make sure you have an input on how your assets are going to be distributed. When you don't have that, you have no input. So to prevent all that, I will have a will so it can be according to your wishes. Now, you may ask, what exactly is in a will? What are the contents? What does a will detail? So you have what's called an executor, usually an executor that's picked from the owner of the policy, not the owner of the policy, but the owner of the will. They're going to pick an executor, a designation executor, and what the executor is doing is making sure that the results of the will are handled. The assets are distributed accordingly. They may be the point in contact person if someone in the family has questions regarding the will. So they play a vital role on making sure that the results of the will are distributed. Also, you have beneficiaries, which are the individuals that inherit the assets. Next are the instructions of how and when the beneficiaries will receive the assets. And then lastly, you have the guardians that you may appoint for any minor children. Now, one thing that's important when it comes to beneficiaries is making sure that you name the beneficiaries, whether you have a will or a trust. Reason being is because when you name your beneficiary, that person is going to get the assets, rather than if you just name a person Joe in the will and he's not labeled as a beneficiary, he's not going to get any of the assets. But when you name the beneficiary, they're going to get the assets rather than anyone else named in the will. Now, some assets where you can name beneficiaries within the estate is an IRA, 401k. You also have 403bs, which are any tax-deferred annuity plans or any brokerage accounts. You're able to name the beneficiaries on these assets when you're estate planning. And one thing is, it enables a direct transfer of the asset without involving the will, and it has a greater authority over the will. So this one thing that's important, making sure that you name your beneficiaries and making sure you have the right assets that gives you the flexibility with that. Now, the assets that pass through the will, they have what's called is the probate process. And what a probate is pretty much a legal process for settling estate, whether one has a will or not. And the probate, it varies state by state. In some states, they have inexpensive options if you're below a certain value. So if you're only having a estate of $50,000, they may be able to give you a lot lower fees that are associated, with a probate. But as I mentioned earlier, if the asset allows the owner to name a beneficiary, then they won't have to go through the probate process. Now, another asset that doesn't go through the probate process is when you have a trust. And what a trust is, it's another strategy where you can minimize your estate taxes, and it has other benefits as well. And a bigger explanation of what an estate is a fiduciary agreement between you and a third party or someone you label, you pick as a trustee, and they are the ones that are going to hold the assets on behalf of the beneficiary or the beneficiaries. And this allows you to specifically pick how and when the assets will be passed to your beneficiaries. Now, since trusts, avoid the probate process, your beneficiaries are going to have quicker access to the assets available being transferred with a trust in comparison to those assets being transferred through a will. So that's why some people prefer to go with a trust, because they don't want to go through the probate process. They want to eliminate the court fees completely. So they're going to have a trust where they pick a person that's going to hold the assets, and they're going to carry out the instructions and make sure the assets are passed down to the designated, beneficiaries. And, I love trust because they allow you to be able to have control of your wealth, and it also gives you protection of your legacy. You're able to specify in the trust precisely, and it allows you to control when and to whom the distributions may be made. So, for example, you can have what's called a revocable trust, and that allows the assets to remain available to you while you're still living, and you can still designate where the assets are going to go after you pass away. So it gives you the flexibility of being able to manage your assets and then being able to pick who you want it to be designated to once you pass away. So trusts are great, and I think that the biggest thing of it is that it allows you to have protection of your legacy. So it's going to allow you to be able to protect your estate from your heirs' creditors. So if your heirs have any creditors, it's going to allow you to be able to keep that money and maximize it on what you give to your beneficiaries. And also, it can also protect your beneficiaries if they may not be skillful in money management. So if you have someone in your family you want to designate that role to, it's a great option where you're able to protect your legacy, and people that may not be skillful in money management, you already have the specific instructions on how you exactly want the trust to be. You have exact control of how your wealth will be distributed. So I want to tell you all, thank you for tuning in to this episode on me discussing estate planning, and I hope you all take some time to do a research on building an effective estate plan and making sure that you have either a will or trust in place to be able to transfer your assets. Once you pass away, it's vital to make sure that's in place so your family can at least be able to have a legacy left behind for them. So as always, please like, subscribe, and share this YouTube video. I will greatly appreciate that. If you all could go listen to this episode on Anchor. I have a podcast as well. It's a little bit longer than how this episode was, so it gives you a little bit more details. So if I'll put the link tree in the show notes, and I thank you all for your support, and take care.